John Jones put on a masterclass against Stipe Miocic tonight, ultimately defeating him after this rib-deforming body shot caused the heavyweight to go down. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at what exactly could have happened here in terms of underlying injuries with Stipe after this rib-deforming blow. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and the goal in this channel is to teach you more about the medical side of the sports world. Now, most of the body shots that we hear about ending a combat sport are going to be a shot to the liver. We've seen the famous liver kicks, liver blows that have this kind of delayed reaction where the athlete will initially seem to be okay, but then in a few seconds drop down to the ground seemingly unable to get up. This is different. His liver is not going to be on this left side of his chest. We can see the initial impact is going to be absorbed by Miocic's primarily latissimus dorsi. So as we back this up a little bit, we see the outline right here. That's going to be his lat muscle. The lat is going to be there, functionally it's helping to move the arms, but the muscles are also there to help protect our body. So in this case with Miocic, that lat is going to try and absorb some of the initial blow. Unfortunately, it doesn't absorb that much of the blow, and we see this significant amount of deformation go into the ribs and that upper left thoracic region of Miocic, potentially causing some injury to the internal organs. From this view, again, we can see that that blow doesn't come in anywhere near Miocic's liver on the upper right quadrant of the abdomen. Instead, it comes in square flush on the side. And so keep that in mind as we look at our anatomy tool and talk about the potential injuries that need to be followed up and at least monitored for here with Miocic. Looking at our biodigital anatomy tool here, we divide the abdomen into quadrants. So you just split this down the middle, split across this way. This is going to be the right upper quadrant. This is going to be the left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. And we define abdominal pain based on the region that it's located. So somebody who is having, for example, gallbladder pain, you might say they have right upper quadrant abdominal pain. Somebody who's having appendicitis might have right lower or left lower abdominal pain. And so that generally defines the geographic regions and what organs are located there. The liver is going to be this guy right here. There are these different lobes of the liver, and it's going to sit tucked nice and tight up inside underneath the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the muscle that is going to separate the thorax or the chest from the abdomen, and the diaphragm is what allows us to breathe by expanding and contracting that thorax and subsequently the lungs. We're going to see all this is being guarded by the rib cage to help protect the lungs, protect the heart sitting here deep behind the sternum. But the first organ we're going to worry about, right upper quadrant, is the liver. This is the classic location for a liver shot. Punch comes into the side. That energy is transmitted into the ribs, subsequently into the liver, causing this delayed neurologic sort of autonomic sympathetic outflow and parasympathetic outflow that can cause your body to shut down. In the case here with Miocic, though, the kick comes in right about in this area. So number one, what possibly could be hurt here? Well, of course, the ribs. I would be shocked if Miocic does not have a rib fracture. And we talk about our rib anatomy. These lower ribs are actually considered floating ribs. So these ribs all the way down here at the bottom are floating because the tip of the rib is not actually attached to anything. If you go to the ribs above, you'll see how the rib is actually indirectly anchored into the ribs above through this costal cartilage. Whereas if you go higher up, more in the top part of the chest, you're going to see the ribs are directly into the sternum through this costal cartilage right here. So these floating ribs down lower are designed to be more mobile. They're designed to act a little bit like, a crumple zone or that airbag to absorb some of that blow, some of that impact. And when we look at what happened here with Miocic, that almost certainly is where part of this blow came in. A shot to this lower part, potentially hitting these floating ribs, are going to be less likely to fracture the floating ribs, but because that rib is more mobile, it's more likely to cause that energy to transfer and potentially injure the underlying organ. So what is going to be that underlying organ? We can see here that latissimus dorsi muscle, which we're going to hide. And behind that area, the first big organ we're going to see is going to be the kidneys. Now, we have a left and a right kidney, and those kidneys are going to sit tucked up nice and tight, sort of along the backside of the abdominal cavity. And so one injury you got to watch out for here is a renal laceration or a renal hematoma, basically blood or a cut in the tissue of the kidney. And the kidney is really important because there's a lot of blood flow to the kidney because of how it's filtering out and reabsorbing all these electrolytes, nutrients, etc. from our body. Lots of blood flow to the kidney. Kidney laceration can be a very serious thing. The other organ that sits right up here is going to be the spleen. The spleen is part of what processes white blood cells. It's important for production of those things in our body. And again, very, very highly vascularized. In fact, to the point where if somebody has a bad spleen laceration or a bad spleen cut, sometimes you can't stop the bleeding. And the only way to stop the bleeding and potentially being fatal is to actually remove the spleen, do a splenectomy. And so that's something as well to think about here, because again, all of that blow coming in, hitting these lower ribs, pushing those ribs in with the amount of deformation we see, that energy has to be transmitted somewhere, potentially being transmitted into the spleen or into the kidney. So those are going to be the main organs that we think about here as we're continuing to evaluate, and the medical staff are continuing to check in on Stipe going forward. The big sign they're going to watch for is just progression of abdominal pain. You can also potentially see some bruising or ecchymosis underneath the skin as a sign of that intra-abdominal bleeding from something like a spleen laceration or a kidney laceration. Hopefully, best case scenario here, we're just dealing with some bruised rib, probably some cracked ribs, but depending on exactly where that energy got transferred in, very real possibility of something more serious like a spleen laceration or a kidney laceration. The severity of those then, of course, just depend on how bad. How bad is the bleeding? How much damage in there? Everything from simple monitoring, few weeks recovery time, up to, like I mentioned, the possibility of having to have the spleen removed. So yes, Stipe seems pretty okay right now. He's tough in the moment. What's going to be important is these subsequent hours and days, thinking about this possible underlying anatomy and these possible organ injuries. We think a lot about these musculoskeletal things, rib fractures, ACL tears, shoulder dislocations, but remember, there's more to the body than just the orthopedic things, and we as sports medicine doctors always have to be on the lookout for these possible intra-abdominal organ injuries based on the anatomy and based on where the impact comes in. That's it for the video, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this quick little anatomy lesson in relation to UFC. Let me know, as always, any questions or comments down below, and the next time we'll see you later.